Welcome to the Storypowers Podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is Nausheen I, Chen. Nausheen is a keynote speaker and leadership communications coach, helping leaders speak with high impact on camera, on stage, and in person. She has spoken and trained at TEDx, TechCrunch Disrupt, Startup Grind, the Wagon, and many more places I wouldn't know how to pronounce. But believe me when I say that the list is very long. She's also a woman with no common sense or self-preservation instinct, because she's agreed to be the guinea pig to the very first Storypowers Lab, where I'll help someone solve a business communication problem through story. We're going to figure out what story she needs, dig up through her past for all the sordid and embarrassing details, and then craft it together. Live. Well, not live for you, but live for us, which is just about the same thing, I guess. Is it going to work? Are you going to enjoy listening to it? There's only one way to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, Nausheen I, Chen. Nausheen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Francisco. It's a pleasure being here. It's great talking to you. And you've already set the tone and expectations very low. So, we can only go up from here.
Well, I find that that's the secret to life, right? The worst thing is you want people to expect too much from you, and then you're bound to disappoint. And I've learned that from my first marriage.
Oh, dear.
Uh, So I call this thing the Storypowers Lab. This is not a name I have, focused group or thought about in a great extent, but it is an experiment. I've done this plenty of times before, but I've not done it on the podcast. So what I'm hoping is going to happen is, within the hour or so that most of my episodes run to, we'll be able to solve one major business problem for you when it comes to communication, but maybe if it goes really well, we can solve a few. Mm-hmm. So for anyone who doesn't quite get what we're trying to do here, the whole idea is that a lot of people have to present themselves. They have to sell what they do, and in your case, being a entrepreneur, a coach, you have to do a lot of that. And often people struggle with that, or they find that every time they do it, it's kind of improvised, or they kind of have a bit of a pitch, but it might not be either effective enough, or they just don't feel that comfortable with it. So in your particular case, when I put out a call for anyone that wanted to be part of this mad experiment, why did you want to do it?
So this immediately jumped out at me from the LinkedIn screen because I'm in a transitory phase. I have been many different things in life. I was a corporate employee. I was in PR and marketing at a Fortune 50 company. Then I was a filmmaker, kind of came out of left field. And then this year I decided that I need to actually do what I love doing. I just didn't know what it was. I just knew it had something to do with communications. And over the last few months, I've done a lot of soul searching, as cringeworthy as that word is, soul searching and inner discovery, and realized that what I really love doing is public speaking and delivering workshops, and I love the art of communication. So what I want to transition to in the next 6 months is a leadership communications coach. I'm already doing coaching. I'm already actually working with a few clients, and I have worked with different kinds of leaders in the past to help them deliver things like product launch speeches and product video talks. So in bits and pieces, I've done this work over time, but now because I'm transitioning to something new, I need a new origin story. And that's really why this really jumped out at me, because I felt like this is something that I can really be very into. I am very into, and I always wanted to work with you in one way or the other. So it was a perfect opportunity.
That's fair enough. I must say that you said that soul searching is like a cringy thing. I don't think it's cringy. I think it's just terrifying. I'm not sure I want to search in there. I'm trying to live an outward-facing life, because who knows what I might find out when I look too deeply into what I'm doing. Just one thing I noticed now that we started talking. there seems to be some noise behind you. I don't know if it's like cars going past or whatever it is. But one thing that you can do that will, again, this will disappear in editing. But if you look in the bottom of the screen, there is a little microphone symbol. So if you click that, you mute yourself. So if I'm talking and the noise behind you starts being loud or anything like that, then you can mute yourself, and then it's one less thing for us to get rid of in post edit, right? I mean, if you're talking, there's nothing we can do about it, but it's just background noise. It's not terrible, but see now it's got worse, but yeah, that's, I guess, China for you.
Yes, sorry.
Okay. That's fine. I'm back into it. All right. So what we need to figure out is, the first thing is, what is the problem? Okay, because I get what you're saying. You need to find a new way to introduce yourself to people. Okay. Now, is the problem that you haven't like the faintest clue of what that is? Or you've tried some stuff but haven't quite managed to make it work? What do you think is happening now?
I think I definitely have an idea of how to approach it. I feel like sometimes I'm too succinct, way too concise, where I just say I'm a leadership communications coach and I help leaders make high impact through speaking on stage, on camera, or in person. Maybe that's direct, but I'm not sure if it's attractive enough. Doesn't have a story, really. That's not a story. Or then if I start telling my story, it's just way too long, because then I start with public speaking was my first love, but I didn't know how to make a living out of it. I mean, do clients really want to know that? I'm not sure. So that's where I'm kind of stuck, where it's either just very, very short, but I feel like it's not memorable enough, or it's just a long-winded story, which I'm happy to tell you, which I don't know. I don't know if I should be going that route.
Okay, so one thing you might be familiar with, because I know you followed my work to some extent, is this idea I've sort of inspired by a guest in my show a long time ago called Nausheen I. So he had the 3 different types of very short introductory stories. I kind of tweaked them a little bit and called them elevator stories. And it's this idea of the 5-second story, which is essentially what you use to replace your job title. And it's the first thing people say, what do you do? And I would say, I help people become more interesting than Netflix. So I'm kind of going for something obscure, because I think it's kind of boring to say, I help leaders do this through that, right? I think that's just a bit too much on the nose. So I like something kind of obscure that makes people say, okay, what the hell does that mean? Or how do you do that? And then that takes you to the 30-second story, where you just talk a little bit about the problem, right? A lot of people are really good at their job. They're really passionate about what they do, about helping their clients, but they don't really know anything about marketing. They don't like any salesy stuff. So they're really struggling to get new clients, or to get people on board with their ideas and grow either their businesses or in their professions. So I help them use the power of stories to become more interesting than Netflix and grow professionally. All right, so that's kind of the 30-second story, which is, you introduce the problem. You're trying to make people ideally identify with that problem, which is why you might have a few different 30-second stories. And that will be what you use in the vast majority of cases. And then there is the 1-minute story, which is an actual story. And that one, you will use when you have the time to use it. So I use mine all the time when I'm a guest in a podcast. When I am doing some sort of workshop, I often start with that. So in mine, and I'm not going to repeat it here because I've told it a million times in this show, but it's essentially the story of me being called to speak in front of my classroom when I was 12 years old. And then I'm kind of terrified. I'm also, I wasn't a popular kid, so how is this going to go? But then I think, what if people like my story? And then I tell a story, they like it, and at that moment I feel like the most popular kid in the school. And that was how I found out about the power of storytelling. So I don't tell that when someone just asks me what I do, but I use it when I have a little more time. And there's a longer version of that can be part of a workshop or a keynote. So The way I want to do this with you is we'll leave the super pragmatic stuff for the
Mm.
end because I think you already have a 5 second story, and yours is I help people speak like leaders,
Mm-hmm.
not bosses, which is your headline on LinkedIn. So that's a good one because people go, okay, well, what's the difference? Like, what exactly does that mean? Um, we could probably figure out what your 30-second story is right now, but for the 1 minute story, I want to have a bigger origin story, and then we can pick the most appropriate 1 minute moment out of that. It won't take you a minute. It will probably take 30, 40 seconds to tell. But it's also useful if you have the bigger one, because the bigger one becomes part of your brand. You know, it's how, might be your about section, might be how you start a workshop or a keynote, might be when you were in a call with a potential client, you might tell a 1 or 2 minute version of how you got into this stuff. And then once you have that, making it shorter is not that difficult. Okay.
Mm.
Um, so you said something that I want to sort of brainstorm together. You said, "Do people want me to go into a story when I'm talking to them?" So, what do you think? Like, would they want you to go into a story? Would they not want you to go into a story? Why would you possibly tell someone a minute or 2 minute long story at that sort of stage in the
Yeah,
relationship?
that's a great question. And I love how you broke it down into like a 5 second teaser, right? Of like a 5 second job teaser, which leads to a 15 or 30 second story, which then could potentially lead to a 1 minute story. It's a great point. I think that the only times where the story would really be relevant is when I really want to make sure that people understand what is the unique value that I'm offering to them. What is it that I'm really bringing to the table? Why should they work with me and not someone else? And that's really where I struggle a little bit because I feel like I have a lot to say. And I feel like I'm convinced that I bring a lot of value, but how do I bring that conviction out in the story? Because the story is also about me. Perhaps it's not that relevant to them. Perhaps it would resonate more with them if the story was about someone like them. So those are the kind of questions that I struggle with. But yes, that's the context that I'm thinking of when I'm talking to a potential client, for example. In my case, it would be a leader who wants to really work on their communication skills, really work on their public speaking skills, and on their public persona, and someone who really wants to become a public persona and they don't know where to start. So that would be someone that I really love working with. But when I'm talking to them, what kind of story should I be telling when I tell them, like, this is what I do?
That's a very good question because this is something a lot of people get wrong, right? So they don't know. There's this whole story about like nobody cares about your story, which is nonsense. But what is really important to figure out is what is it you're trying to do. Okay, because there's different stories you tell at different times. So if you're telling what I normally call a help story of you helping someone
Mm.
else, that is a very powerful sales tool. Okay, so success stories are the cool version of a review or a
Mm.
testimonial, and you're using them to show someone, listen, I've helped people like you, I've had success with that, and it's your way to kind of pitch in a non-salesy way. But that's not what you would do when you're just getting to know
Mm.
someone. So if they're in your profile, if they're listening to you on a podcast, you are just trying to make them, there's a few different things you can be doing, right? So one of them is you're trying to show them that you're relatable and that you're a little bit like them, or that you were a little bit like them. That's the most traditional way for a coach to use an origin story is where you are now is where I
Mm.
was. Maybe that's because you didn't know, like I was struggling with the same problem, I didn't know how to fix it, then I learned how to fix it, and now I can teach you what I learned. Okay, so it's a very traditional way of looking at an origin story. The other way is, so I tend to think of this as the power and the purpose, right? So it might be about how you got the power to help people. So again, we're talking about skills and how you gain them, or how you were always talented in that particular area. Mine is a bit like that. But it might also be the purpose, right? What is this thing that made you want to help people? Or what was this existential crisis you were going through at some point in your life that you've overcome that the people you're trying to talk to will find relatable? Okay, so a lot of coaches who work with people who are trying to change careers, their origin story is probably going to have a career change of some kind, or at least a big life change, because that's what you want to basically say. I've been where you are. I know how to get you out. So this is, if you think of mine, to be super specific on mine has three aspects. Mine is the whole, I'm being called to speak in front of a whole bunch of people. It's kind of a terrifying moment. I think a lot of people can relate to the fear of public speaking. Then I talk about how I wasn't a popular kid and I didn't feel like I fit in, a feeling that a lot of people have or have had at some point in their lives. And then I talk about how it turns out I was actually pretty good telling stories and from an early age, which suggests that after all these years, I'm an expert or something. Okay, so there's three different levels I'm hitting with that story. You don't need to hit three different things, but we need to find what is the one that works for your audience, but also the one that can be backed up by your life story. Okay, some life stories give themselves more to one thing or the other. So the first step we need to do here is we need to figure out what is the main audience you want to talk to. Because if we don't know that, then it's very difficult to tailor that story. What's the focus of the story? So if you had to pick one audience, either the one you want to work with more, or the one you think you're more likely to talk to or to be exposed to through, workshops or keynotes or podcasts or however you're coming across people, what would you say that audience
That audience
is?
would be a senior leader who has accomplished a lot internally, but they are still terrified of public speaking. And they are at a stage now where they would like to, or they are being asked to represent the company or to work on their own personal brand outside of the company and work on getting more speaking opportunities, work on really creating this public presence through speaking.
Okay. Would you say that these are people who want this growth in their career? Like they want to grow, but they have this obstacle that is public speaking, or that wouldn't necessarily be the case?
They definitely want to grow. These are definitely people that feel that they have a lot to offer in terms of their experience, their expertise in their industry. And they just don't know if they have the right words, if they have the right way of expressing what they need to say to an external audience. They don't know where to start. It's all very intimidating. It's like a black box when it comes to public speaking. And they have had some issues in the past. It could be just simple stage fright or feeling like they repeat things too much, they have too many filler words, feeling like they're not making the right impact. A lot of the clients I talk with have kind of like this fear of not being able to answer the questions that are asked. So not being seen as the authority that they know they are, but they don't quite know how to express it.
Okay. All right. So the obvious approach here is one that, knowing what I know about you, is probably not going to work for you. Because the obvious approaches here would be, when were you terrified of public speaking? So that would be the obvious, right? If you were someone who were terrified of public speaking and you've gotten over that, that would be a fairly obvious origin story. But understanding your background, you always liked getting in front of people and speaking. Then the other sort of obvious approach would be not so much the fear of public speaking, but the skills required for it. So, maybe you weren't someone who's afraid, but you sucked at it. Like you were really, really bad at it. And then, and you weren't being able to achieve the things you wanted to achieve because of it. And again, it doesn't need to be that deep, but sometimes just like we would need a time where you were just really bad. And then you got better, and that allowed you to get the things you wanted. So maybe that's possible, maybe it's not. Okay. The third one, which will take more work, but it might be the one we have to go with, is is this idea of an obstacle, right? So to grow as a person and to become who you really want to become, you need to do something that you feel that you not that you're afraid necessarily, but it's like for some reason you blocked, right? So you really want to grow in your career. You really you want to become a better leader. You want to become an influence in your industry, but there is this obstacle in the way. And in their particular case, the obstacle is their fear of public speaking or their lack of ability of public speaking, or whatever it might be. In your case, there was an obstacle in your way from becoming who you wanted to become, which was a public speaker and working with public speaking. And in your case, there will be something that stopped you from doing that for all these years. Okay, and maybe, again, I don't know, but it might be imposter syndrome. It might be that you weren't thinking, you were trying to please other people instead of doing the stuff that was for you. So again, we would have to figure out exactly what that is, but that would be the hardest route to go around the origin story. But if it is the truth, then that's the truth. It's just a case of positioning it carefully enough. So we know that 1 is out because you weren't ever afraid of speaking in public. Is 2 out as well, or did you ever?
I think I was definitely very average when I started. I don't know if I sucked. I can't. I mean, for sure, if I see myself like in the past, there were different kinds of strengths that I had, but I was also a different person, and I've kind of captured myself at different moments in time. Unfortunately, I don't have some of the very early stuff that I did, because I've been public speaking and delivering workshops since maybe I was 23, 24, but I have no recordings of that, of like between the ages of 24 to maybe 29. I don't really have anything. I just know I did a lot of stuff. And the earliest stuff that I have of me like on camera is really funny. It's really silly as well, because I got into public speaking actually through improv at that time. It's actually weird. I first got into radio, then I got into training, because at Procter & Gamble, I was one of the youngest corporate trainers, and I loved that, because anyone who's been in the company for like 2 years can train to be a trainer if they're interested. So I was really interested. So it was radio, then it was training, and it was training in leadership, communication skills, presentation skills, time management. And then after that, it was improv. So I stumbled into improv and stand-up comedy, and I ended up writing, directing, and producing these really crappy comedy segments on this late night comedy TV show. Ended up making some really also equally crappy short films, and then ended up working with actors and then eventually business leaders to help them, deliver their speeches on camera. So it would be hard for me to kind of, I'm sure at some point it was not very easy. No, I'm sure at some point it wasn't very effective. It was always easy in a way for me, because I've actually traced this back. I don't know if this would resonate with you, but I was always the kid in my family who was like pushed to the forefront. I was always like the little, I don't know, like the little prize puppy, like the little show dog. It was like, Nausheen, recite something for us. Nausheen, tell a joke. Nausheen, tell us what happened at school. And I would just be like, okay, I'm going to do this now. So it was just...
I didn't have that in my family that I can remember, but I had that in school. I was always the one who, when we did group work, someone had to present it, and the teachers wanted everybody to present a little bit, but always there was one kid that presented more than anybody else, and that was always me. Which is, when I remember that, I thought, but is it dishonest for me to try and say that me getting in front of the class was terrifying? But the truth is, it was because it was like, she wanted me to tell a story that like I had written, and not, like I wasn't presenting a work that I had practiced. Like I never told a story in front of anyone. It's different to talk about how, the Portuguese discovered Brazil, and talk about like this thing that you've invented that might be horrible, but might not be. Okay, so let's park that to one
Okay.
side, right? Because we don't want to do is we don't want to torture the truth to try and find, well, but we can kind of say you sucked when it's, because it might be true, but it might not be, and that's the truer it is, the more conviction you have when you tell it. So let's just put that one side for now. Okay, now I've seen your story about how for 17 years you did all sorts of different careers because people in your life did them, and you never did the thing that you really wanted, which was become a public speaker and work with public speaking. So I know that, but let me just understand, if you knew early on that you wanted to do it, what was stopping you? Why weren't
Right.
you doing
So
it?
I grew up as an only child and with a single mom. So immediately, and this was a developing country. So immediately you could tell that I grew up in a very kind of pragmatic environment where being pragmatic, earning a living, making sure that you're always self-sufficient and financially independent were huge goals. And they were kind of drilled and drummed into me by my mom, who was also very fiercely independent. So because of that, that's probably the number one concern that I had growing up. And when I first got a job in the corporate world, there was it totally made sense to go down that path. And after that, when I did have, what I fondly call my quarter life crisis, where I just broke away from everything, it I was still pragmatic and I still wanted to figure out something concrete that I could do that I could be paid for. And at the time, I thought it was filmmaking. So it was always, I think I might have known that I would love to figure out how to be a public speaker and how to work in public speaking, maybe sometime in my mid or late 20s. But I never had the conviction that I could make a living off of it till now. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So what I'm hearing is a couple of things. The one of them is, there was something you wanted to do, but there were two obstacles to it. One of them is you just don't know if you're good enough. So that's the conviction part. Like, you want to do it, but am I good enough? Is it going to be a massive risk? Is it going to be a mistake? Can I actually pull this off? So that's one part of it. The other part of it is what you grew up to believe was the right way to live your life, or to be an adult. And most of these other things you did sort of tick that box, and I'm supporting myself, it's a serious job, this is what I need to be doing with my life. And the thing you wanted to do, the thing that will make you feel authentic in what you're doing, that would make you feel like, okay, this is it, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, that didn't tick that box, or at least you felt it didn't tick that box because of how you grew up. Okay, does that
Yeah,
make sense?
yeah. I think a lot of it was also that I didn't live a very introspective life. I was always more or less an extrovert. I was always the person who wanted to have a lot of adventures, and I did, and just, be out and about and go out and experience life. But the flip side was that I just never spent enough time by myself. So I actually never took the time to reflect on what it is that would actually bring me joy and what has brought me joy in the past. Everything just kind of seemed like an equal level of okay. And it was only when I really deeply thought about it that I realized, wait a minute, being on stage, that's where I feel the most joy. That's where I feel the most comfortable. That's the one thing that I am not terrified by. That's the one thing where I don't feel like I'm going to let people down. And throughout my life, my presentations have always been the things that people have appreciated, sometimes, ironically, more than my actual work. So can I tell you a quick story? This this one
Go
time
for
I
it.
was I had a film in a film festival in it's Tenerife, right? Not Tenerife, because I always mispronounce it. Tenerife.
if you wanna pronounce it perfectly, yes,
I was in
Tenerife.
Tenerife at a film festival. My film was one of the films selected to be in the festival. I was ecstatic. I was the only person there that was from my side of the world. And you had to go and present your film to an audience of investors and TV stations so that they would see if they wanted to buy it. And my presentation was flawless. Like, they people came up to me afterwards because there were these booths and you could then have one-on-one conversations. So people came up to me and they said, your presentation was great, and then we saw the trailer of your film and it sucked. They made no bones about it. They were just like, your trailer was such a letdown, and this is not something we want to invest in, but we wanted to stop by to tell you we loved your presentation.
Okay, so this might be very
Okay.
useful. Okay, because because what you just described is someone who can get up in front of other people, impress them, make them expect good things from you, but then the actual work was not to that same level. Is it fair to say that a lot of the people that you work with and want to work more with have the opposite problem to you? Their work is good. Their work is probably one of the best things that they have about themselves, but either because they don't get up there to present or because they present so badly, people think less of the work, and in many cases that could lead to them not having opportunities to actually show anyone that they're good.
That's a very interesting way of looking at it. I hadn't thought about that before. Yeah, yeah, it could be that people have the opposite problem because that, yeah, I
Okay.
always felt like, when clients would talk to me, I always felt like I wish I had stage fright because I mean, I could definitely sympathize, but I cannot put myself in their shoes. Of course, I wouldn't tell them this because I don't want them to feel that I'm, elevating myself or being arrogant about it. But yeah, I always found it difficult to relate to stage fright or feeling nervous on the stage.
Wasn't there something that pushed you over the edge? Um, because normally there is the case, right? Normally there is something that, like, what you're doing, you have a really bad day at the thing you've been doing, and or it's just accumulation of bad days, and at some point you go like, this is just not right. Okay, so in my case, there's some similarities to your story in that money and being able to support myself was very important to me growing up because my family didn't have that much money. So a lot of the decisions I took in my life were because I was subconsciously, I think, looking for that more sure thing. When I could have done more exciting things, I was like, but there's this kind of steady, boring job. I think that's what I should be doing instead of trying for things that are riskier. And I did that for a very long time. I did it for long after I figured out that I liked speaking in public and that I was decent at it. And what pushed me over the edge was finding out I was gonna have another kid, because having one kid and being a grown up is not enough for you to learn how that process works. Uh, so that to me was the sort of like wake, a friend of mine loves calling the anagoresis moment, where something changes. There's that moment of big changes, like the veil falls from your eyes, and you go like, "This is it, right? If I don't do this now, I'm never gonna do it." Now, it doesn't need to be something dramatic, but usually there is something that either pushes you over the edge or puts you on the road that leads you to change. So to a lot of people is a life change, is children, is marriage, is changing country or anything like that, and a pandemic. To a lot of other people is just something that happens in their current life or professional life. So either the job is not working out, you're missing out on promotions that you thought you were gonna get, or the opposite, like you get a promotion or you get an offer for a better job and you're not excited at all about it because you realize it's not what you want. Or it might just be that you do the thing that you love kind of for as a hobby in one particular day, and you're just so excited about it that it makes you realize, why am I not doing this all the time? So it's a moment more or less like that I'm looking for. because it's always more exciting if we can illustrate the process with one moment in time and not with like a timeline.
I understand that. That would make it makes for a more exciting, more glamorous story. I have
It's not so
almost.
much that it's a glamorous story, is that you you can tell a story as a timeline, and sometimes that's the way you have to do it, but you can't make a timeline vivid and memorable. You just can't, right? You can talk about how for 17 years you did this thing because your husband did it, you did this other thing because a friend did it, and that's a nice cohesive story. But what you want is like an action scene that is the one bit that people remember, because that's probably what you're going to use if you do, say, a 1 minute story. The timeline doesn't work as well for that. So the scene where you either screwed up completely the thing that you shouldn't have been doing to begin with, or you were really, really good at the thing you meant to be doing, or whatever it is. And again, I do think that the being really good at the presentation and sucking at the movie, that can work for that. But I'm sure there must be others, because your life is made up of moments. Your life is not a timeline. It's
Mhm.
just a question of digging them out from inside your brain, so we can use them.
So I would say that in a lot of ways, I have lived a life of change. I have gotten used to change from a very young age. When my dad died when I was 10, I found out I was adopted when I was 18. I quit my marriage, my belief system, my corporate life at 27. I moved countries at 29 and then again at 32. Between the ages of 11 to 22, I think I moved about 17 times. So I have had a life of change, and I've had a life where a lot of external factors have brought about changes in life. I feel that I'm almost at a point where I've internalized that, and I've kind of been able to propel myself towards change almost by giving myself these talks, talking to myself in the way that motivates me to take action. It's, for example, how I gave up smoking. It's how I gave up junk food. It's how I started to learn French because I have been wanting to become French for the longest time. My husband is French, and the only thing standing in between me and becoming French, which was my dream, was me learning French. And
Do you have to become rude as well, or that's just the Parisians?
see, he's not from
Not
Paris,
sure.
he's from the
I'm not
south.
sure. I'm not sure if that's part of the classes, right? To learn how to enjoy wine properly and pronounce it properly, enjoy the stinkiest cheese known to mankind, and be rude to strangers. Maybe it's an
Par-
advanced class.
Parisians get a bad rap.
To get
Paris
the
is actually.
passport, like in America, you have to I think sing the anthem or something. Maybe in Paris, you have to be rude to strangers.
Pass. Check. So
Too nice. Go be Italian or Portuguese or something. Uh,
so yeah, or Spanish, yes. But I think that somewhere along the way, I somehow picked up this art. I don't know how I did it, but I can pretty much talk to myself, in the voice of my high school principal, and tell myself, like, Nausheen, enough is enough. This is not the way to do it. You're going to have to make this change. No one else is doing it for you. So get to it. Just get to it.
so you've changed just about everything everything about yourself, but the one thing that was a constant, which was how you love public speaking, it took you almost 40 years to change.
Yeah. When you put it like that, it makes sense. It's so
Well,
ironic.
but yeah, in the question then is why? Because you did talk about your mom and about how there's this pragmatic thing about is this the but you've done non-pragmatic jobs. Like being a filmmaker is not the most pragmatic way of earning money. So um,
I was a commercial
and
filmmaker. Commercial filmmakers
okay,
earn more than the The creative starving
Well,
artists,
well,
sadly.
my brother is a commercial filmmaker, so I'm
There you go.
aware of that world. But it's still not the easiest way to make money compared to some of the other stuff that I think you had as experiences in the past. And the corporate world is probably a much easier way to make money than that. But okay, so let me just get back to what I was trying to get to, or guess at maybe is, so you haven't had trouble changing. Changing was not something you had issues with. But this thing that you've known you wanted for a very long time, you taken you the longest time to like it's taken you the longest time to change your life, to do the thing known you wanted for the longest time. Um, and the armchair psychologist in me suggests that because that wasn't something you wanted to change, there is a bigger fear of changing into, changing your life for this to happen, to do this, because this is not something you were willing to eventually change and let go of, given that it's one of the only things perhaps that it was been a constant in your identity throughout all this time. Am I completely off the mark there?
No, no, you're quite close. The armchair psychologist could be, a great second job for you at some point. It probably is part of your job anyway, as
Mm,
creating stories and helping people create stories.
mm,
Yeah, I think that I tried a lot of things in life as
mm.
an experiment just to
Yep,
see what they would turn out to be.
yep,
And if I failed at them, that's okay. It doesn't really hurt me because I didn't want that in the first place. I did
yep.
try and I did commit to it and I did put in the work. But if it doesn't work out, all right, cool, I can move on to the next thing. But
Right.
maybe public speaking was the one thing I didn't want to move on from, which is why I kept it alive. It was like this burning flame, this little candle
Mm,
for like
yep.
since I was 22 when I started training. I would Since then I found so many different opportunities just to be on stage, mostly for
Yep.
free, just to give talks and workshops wherever I could
Mm,
because it was just always something I loved doing.
mm.
But yeah, it could be that it was just so close to me that I actually didn't want to risk trying to make a living off of it and then failing miserably.
Mm. Well, yeah, because the failure there actually matters. The failure
Yes.
in other stuff is I gave it a go, wasn't for me, move on. And this one is like, well, hold on. I, since I was a kid, this was the one thing I knew that I wanted to do. And if I fail at this, then what's left?
The one thing I'm good
Perhaps.
at, you can
Yeah.
you can
Okay.
take away filmmaking from me. I think I'm just an average filmmaker. You can take away corporate managerial experience from me. But if you take
Yep.
away my communication skills, I would just feel that I have done nothing in life.
Mm. Okay. Okay. So where I think we are is this, right? There is the thread that I see from the beginning is that, you know do you know that annoying kid that on family reunions like gets in front of everybody and wants to do a performance or wants to sing or dance, and I think most people know that annoying kid. You were that annoying kid, and you know ever since you knew yourself to be anyone, the one thing you knew about yourself was that you wanted to speak in public, and you even though you knew that from a very early age, you never actually committed to that. Perhaps because you grew up with your mom being very sensible and wanting you to, you were raised by a single mom. She wanted you to not struggle so much in life as perhaps she did, supporting you. So you gotta get a real serious job, and you got into corporate. And the first chance they gave you, you started training other people in how to present better and speak better. Still somehow didn't realize that this was a career that perhaps you should follow. And then, a friend, you said a friend of yours, you only got it as a friend of yours was in marketing. You got in marketing because of that. Then someone else got into, what was the second career?
Filmmaking
So
after that.
okay, so
In the
the
middle
second,
was
filmmaking.
improv and other things along the
Okay.
side, theater.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you change careers more than once. because other people were doing them. It's insensible things to do. And even though you were doing improv and you're doing all sorts of other stuff, still didn't make sense to you that this was the career you should be following. You were so oblivious to it that when you went to your very first film festival in Tenerife, you did a presentation before the movie, then they showed the teaser, and people came to you to say, wow, that presentation was amazing, but your work sucks. I was really let down by that trailer. And instead of thinking, maybe the presentation is the thing I'm good at, and maybe that's what I want to be focusing on, you still didn't do it. And and that went on for a very long time. And this is perhaps the bit where I'm kind of missing is, and in I changed careers. I stopped smoking. I changed religion. I changed country. I changed husbands. I changed religion. I changed the length and color of my hair. The only thing that never changed was loving public speaking, wanting to do it, but not actually doing it. And then as I got close to my 40s, I decided enough. Now is about time I change. And now here you are. So that's sort of the thread, right? And I think there is something, I think ideally you need at least one or two more moments to bring that to life. And you have to make it a little tighter. But I think you could definitely tell that from beginning to end in maybe 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, something along those lines. So if you ever wanted to do it from beginning to end, you could do it, and that's more or less what I think that story would look like.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think we need more strategic thinking here is because you're trying to appeal to a specific audience, right? And I think that from all the things we've seen, I mean, I don't think that your audience will necessarily relate to this idea of I've always wanted to do a thing, but I didn't. I don't think that's going to be them. They won't, I don't think, relate to I was the weird kid that always wanted to be in front of other people. So I think that from the things we looked at, somewhat surprisingly, that story about the film festival, that's the one that I think creates, well, one, it's fun, it's kind of memorable, we can make it more memorable, but it leads you very easily into saying, I was great at presenting my work, but my work wasn't good enough. Most people I work with have the opposite problem. Their work is great, but people don't think it's great because they can't present it. And that means that they suffer this way, they suffer that way, they suffer this other way. Okay? I think that for a lot of people that will make absolute sense, and that is the 1 minute story, right? And again, it's not a particularly personal or revealing one. I mean, you can add a few lines in there, and we can work on them a little bit now to just figure out how you share a little bit more of yourself in there, so it's a little more personal.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't need to be your whole journey in life to get the impact you want. Okay, so that's with what we've covered. I think for the audience you want to speak to, I think that would be what I would go with now. Thoughts?
That makes a lot of sense. Picking a story that does not necessarily represent the origin, doesn't necessarily represent what I'm doing, like isn't necessarily super recent, but is indicative of that skill set that I'm showcasing. It makes a lot of sense. And as you were talking about that story, I realized actually this is a recurring pattern. This was a recurring pattern during my filmmaking. So it really bolsters your point, like, Nausheen, what? Why were you not thinking about this? So there were actually quite a few times where I was able to get us deals because eventually, of course, if you're the entrepreneur, you eventually become the salesperson, which was something I hated. But I would be the one pitching to the clients, and they would love the pitch. They would love the way I presented it and how passionate I was when I talked about it. And some of those clients were pretty disappointed with the work that we did. But it was my
Mm,
pitch that got us there, which
mm,
actually ended up making me feel horrible because I felt like
mm.
such an imposter,
Yeah,
thinking like
yeah,
I'm just tricking these people. I don't want to be
yeah,
doing that.
yeah, yeah. I don't think we necessarily want to emphasize too much that your work is always worse than than your presentations. Um, but okay, so we talk. I think that even that story, the story about the film festival, that can be more of an origin story if we add a couple of details. So, for example, one way to start that story is with the, do you know that annoying kid in family reunions that does this, and that? Well, I was that kid. Like for ever since I known myself, I liked getting on stage. I like speaking, but I was too dumb to realize that that was actually a real career. And I think the worst moment was when I was a filmmaker. It was one of the many careers I did, and I went to Tenerife, blah blah, and then you just tell the story, and then just before you transition into the people I work with now, you would say something like, and even then I didn't learn, right? It still took me a few years to realize that this is what I was really good at and what I should be, the presentation side was what I really should be doing. Now, most of the clients I work with have the opposite problem. Right, so you can make it more of an origin story because you have like, I've had this as a kid. I didn't realize it about myself. It took a long time to realize, but you still get that in there. So when you say I work sucked, presentations were great, now my clients have the opposite problem of mine. So that's how I would make that a little more of an origin story, but still trying to focus on this is the problem of the in a way that's it's kind of a mix between an origin story and in like a help story or a success story, because you're still making it about the problem your clients have, and while at the same time giving them a little bit of yourself and your sense of humor and how you don't take yourself overly seriously, and also saying I've been good at this stuff for a very long time, right? Because you're saying I've been doing this
Mm.
since I was a kid. Many years ago, people were complimenting on how good I was as a speaker. And if you had more time, you could say you could add stuff before the Tenerife story. So you'd say, I was a weird kid, blah blah blah, and I loved it for all my life. Like I got into a corporate job. First thing I did after a year or two, I started training people in the company in public speaking, and then I did this other thing, and on the side I was doing improv. So you could add things to show how you've been doing this for a long time. You're an expert, but at the same time, kind of stay self-deprecating and go, but I was such a doofus that I didn't I like it was staring me in the face, and I didn't take it seriously. And again, this is all about
Mm.
you. This is not nothing you really want people necessarily to relate to, but maybe some of them might relate to, in the sense of like, what I've done for for a long time in my life wasn't what I wanted to do. Okay. um, so that's how I would make that story more of an origin story. Okay.
Mm.
So, all right. Now the let's try and assemble it. Okay. Now the long one you can I think you can assemble in your own time and try to
Yes.
tell like a longer version of it in your own time. And if you do that, we might decide that we want to sort of record that, and I can like add as a postscript to the podcast at some point. But what I want to try and do is get those three elevator stories in place, so we know, so we walk out of here with something very concrete. Um, so we had the 5 second story, which is, I help people speak like a leader, not a boss. Um, the 30-second story. So it starts with, describe what your client's problems is, and tell me how you help them. So just do that 30-second one.
So
Most of
not.
the people yeah, most of the people I work with, and now tell me what their problem is,
Mm.
and then tell
Okay.
me how you help them. So this is not a story. Just tell me what their
This is not a
problem is.
story.
Yeah, no. This is
Right.
we're calling the 30-second story, but it's not really a story. Okay.
Okay. So, you know, There are a lot of people that would love to speak in public, but they just feel that they don't have the right confidence, they don't have the right tools, they don't have a clue as to where to begin. And where I come in is that I help them figure out how to deliver their message in the most impactful way on a public stage.
Or on camera or in person.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was trying to
Yes.
encapsulate everything with the public
Yeah.
stage, but yeah, yeah.
On a
On a
stage, on
stage,
camera, in
on
person.
camera,
No,
in
because
person.
that's line because it's part of your brand that bit, right? And
Yes.
it's a good way to explain it. The one thing I would suggest as a tweak there is there are some people who would love to speak in public. Would they love to speak in public, or it's important for them to speak in public?
Right.
Because there are different things. Like they really have to speak in public if they want to grow in their careers or grow their businesses. There are
Yeah.
different things. A lot of people hate the idea of public speaking, but they will never get anywhere if they don't speak in public. So I would just maybe tweak that to something a little less. You don't eliminate all the people that generally hate the idea of public speaking,
There are more
but
of
have
them.
to do.
You're right.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. Okay, so the 1 minute story is you, and again, you can keep this simple, right? Just you can do the kid bit and tell you how long it took you. So the 1 minute story is gonna be you're gonna tell us about the kid being a kid in the Tenerife thing, and then you're going to lead into the 30-second story essentially. You're gonna do that, and you go, a lot of the people I work with have the opposite problem. Okay. And again, there are two different ways to do the 30-second story. You can just, whatever you used as the opposite problem, you can just describe what you do that way. And that's essentially it. The 1 minute story is tell us a little bit of that story we just put together, and then end with saying, and a lot of people that I work with have the opposite problem. This is what are happening, blah, 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 blah. And so I help them do this, 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 and that. Okay? So you want to take 30 seconds and then give that a go?
Okay. Sure, I can try. So that kid that loves standing up in front of a room full of people and just reciting the most boring poem you can think of. I used to be that kid. I have loved getting up in front of people and just speaking my heart out about everything ever since I can remember. But I have never actually pursued it as a passion, as I've never actually pursued it as a way to earn a living. There were even times in my life where I was praised for public speaking, but not the actual thing I was doing. Wait, I shouldn't say it like that before I tell the story.
You should no, you should
No,
tell the story. So
I
I
should
will
tell the
have the
story.
annoying. I will have the annoying in there, right? So do you know that
Okay.
annoying kids? Because I think that is kind of important. Um, and
Yeah.
so and then the transition is, um, but I never really. Again, you can be more self-deprecating if you want. I would be able to say, I was so silly or such a doofus or so stupid that I never
Mm,
realized that I could make a career out of it, right? And
mm,
it's not as if people never told me, for example,
mm.
right? Or it's not as if I never had a clue that that's what I was good at, right? And people told me that that's what I was good at. For example, and then you tell the Tenerife story.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. So yeah, I was, um,
You
that
know that
annoying,
annoying kid.
the annoying kid. I know lots of annoying kids. Um, do you know that annoying kid who loved getting up? No. Do you know that annoying kid who loves getting up in front of a lot of people at family reunions or uh, this
Or
is
in school.
probably where, yeah, it should be school.
Or yeah,
Um,
do you know that annoying kid in every family or school? That.
hmm.
So that would be one way of doing it.
Do you know that annoying kid in every family or at every school who loves getting up in front of a room full of people and just reciting the most boring poem ever? So I used to be that kid. And I loved public speaking from a very young age, but I was so silly that I never really understood that this is what I wanted to do for a living. Even when people told me that this was one of my strengths, there was this time in Tenerife when I used to be a filmmaker, and I had gotten into this great film festival. I was presenting my film to a room full of investors and TV stations. I presented the film, I showed them the trailer, and I thought I did great, got a room full of applause. And later, people came up to me and they said, "You had a great presentation. You were so passionate, and your trailer sucked." So even then, I didn't realize that filmmaking was not the thing I was supposed to be doing. I had spent time at Procter and Gamble as a trainer. Sorry, I had spent time at Procter and Gamble as a young marketing and PR employee. And the first chance I got into training, but I still didn't think that that was something I could do with my life. And those people that would really benefit from getting up on a stage and talking about their projects, their research, their experience, people that sometimes are forced into the limelight, they have the opposite problem as me. No, I have,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
actually have, no, but it should be the other
Okay,
way.
sorry. So okay, so
Yeah.
once you do the
You're just
Tenerife
lucky.
one,
Yeah.
once you do the Tenerife one, you just go straight into the next bit, right? So you didn't, and they said, but your movie sucked, and and it still took me a few years to commit to
Mm.
that. So because you said I still didn't realize that filmmaking wasn't what I was meant to be doing. I think that
That's
works
not the
better
point
if you
of the
said
story. Yeah.
it still took me a few years to realize that speaking was what I was meant to be doing.
Mm.
But a lot of the people that I work with have the opposite problem. Their work is
Mm.
great, but whenever they have to get up and present that work in front of other people, their presentations suck. If you just want to have the same, and then people think less of their work and how capable they are. So what I do is I help. So
Mm.
from the Tenerife bit, you just go straight. You say, and it still took me a few years to realize that that's what I needed to be. That speaking was what I needed to be doing. But a lot of the people that I work with, so you don't have to do the whole thing. Let's just try and do the. It still took me a few years because it was
Right.
perfect up until that point.
Okay. It still took me a few years to realize that public speaking and training for communication skills is something that I was meant to do. I actually ended up having the opposite problem as my clients now, because my clients are people that would really benefit from getting up on a stage and talking about their expertise. They've done the hard work, they've put in the years in developing their expertise, but they just don't know how to present what it is that they've done, how to position themselves as experts in the field on a stage or on camera or in person. And that's what I really love helping people do: figure out how to have a high impact while speaking on that public stage and positioning themselves as experts.
Okay, right. So the that works. The shorter version of that is the shorter version of that is most people that I work with have the opposite problem that I did. Um, their work is great, but their presentations suck. Right? So that's the short way
Mm,
of explaining it. And because they can't present their work, their careers are suffering. They don't feel as fulfilled, whatever you want to call as the two or three things that they're not being able to do. So what I help them do is communicate. So that part was fine, but I would just you want to have in your pocket the shorter version of the 30-second story, because otherwise you risk making the whole thing be 3 minutes long, where you want to be able to you actually want to time yourself and go, okay, you have something like 35 to 40 seconds to tell the story part of it, and then you should
mm,
be able to get 15-20 seconds for the rest. So it's not really a 30-second story, the second one. um, the one thing I'm just now that we kind of have that put together, what I'm trying to figure out to go back to is the headline, so the 5-second story, because the 5-second story is not actually explained in the rest. Like this whole speak like a leader, not a boss, is a different path to go down
mhm.
than the one we're going down now. Um, so I think we need a different 5-second story for this.
Yeah. So I actually wanted to
Okay.
say, like, I've actually So I used to have speak as a leader, speak like a leader, not a boss. And just
Yeah.
very recently, over the last week or 2 weeks, I slightly tweaked it to speak as a leader. So not like, but as. So speak
Yeah.
as a leader on camera, on stage, or in person. So I've
Okay.
removed the not a
As a
boss
boss. Okay.
just
Okay.
for now, just as again as an experiment to see if this, because this I felt was way more clear, um perhaps not as um
Okay.
kind of
So,
catchy
so,
but
so
clearer.
I'm not saying by any means that you need to change your headline. I'm just
Mm,
saying that when it comes to this particular story, we want to say something that leads into the story, right?
mm,
So one way of doing that would be saying something like, um, I, I'm just trying to figure out because I think the whole how um, I help. It says it's getting lengthy, but it's something like I help. I help leaders. It's just like I help leaders show everyone that their work doesn't suck, right? But that's too long. I'm trying to. There's a simpler way of saying this that um, I help. I help leaders prove that their work doesn't suck. That would be like a short enough version of that, and kind of. I think it's confusing enough that people want to know what the hell does that mean, right? And that would lead
mm,
perfectly into your story and what you're showing there. Um, there's probably a different way to do it. Maybe something to do with um, the presentations, but it depends how much you want to say, right? Um, I help. So there's something in there. Like I think that works. I help leaders prove that their work doesn't suck, but there might be a different way of phrasing that. But I think this idea of, um, either that your work, you need to prove people that your work is not as bad as what I don't know. I think that line works, but it might come across slightly aggressive, or you might not like how it sounds. But I think something
mm.
along those lines fits the rest of the story. It might be something to do with I help. Um, I help people not sabotage their careers with their speaking. All right. Um, the,
That
uh,
actually makes a lot of
the
sense. It's just not
yeah. So
snappy, but that is what it is,
yeah,
really. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Um, I help people stop
Not. Mhm.
their. Yeah, but there might be something in there like stop, but there's no self sabotage. Uh, uh,
It's like
yeah,
you've
so
you've
maybe
yeah, you've built years, you've spent years building, building your experience. Don't let one presentation tear
I
it down
I
or something. I
I
don't know.
help people not ruin their careers in. Uh, I help people not ruin their careers uh, uh, on the stage, right? You could say I help people not ruin their careers on stage, or I help people not ruin their careers in 10 minutes, right? Or 15 minutes, whatever you say is the average corporate presentation, right? So I help people not ruin their careers in 20 minutes, right? What does that mean? Well, most people's
Right.
careers hinge on a few very big presentations. Those presentations can be anything from 10, 20, 30 minutes, and one of them that goes catastrophically wrong could make a massive difference in your career. So
Mm-hmm.
this is how you would explain it if you weren't using that model we just created, right? But yeah, so again, if you use something like the time, you would want to build the time in at the very end of the 30-second story. So you'd say, most clients I work with have the opposite problem. Most leaders have the opposite problem that I did. Their work is great, but their presentations suck. And sometimes in one 10-minute presentation, that can change completely how people see the quality of their work and how good they are, right? So I help them get substantially better on stage and camera and in person, so they can speak like the leaders that they are. Right.
Thank you.
You know,
Yeah, you
speak like
put
the
it
leader.
so well.
Speak like the leader that you are. But that's it's kind of inspiring and not so much
Yeah.
not so much like, what the hell is that? Right. Speak like a leader that you are is like, okay, that sounds a bit highfalutin.
Yeah.
I think it works at the end of a story. I don't think it would work as a headline. Okay. So yeah, so that would be my suggestion for the, not the headline, but just for the 5 second story. Either I help people prove that their work, I help leaders prove that their work doesn't suck, or even I help leaders prove that they don't suck, right? Um, or something along the lines of, I help leaders not ruin their careers in 10 minutes. Okay, I think those, that or a variation of those works with the stories, and it's very easy to add or tweak the end of you explaining what you do, and I think it conveys exactly what is it that you're trying to do. Now the challenge is for you to tweak the language so it sounds like you. It shouldn't sound like my words. To feel comfortable with it and be able to do the whole thing beginning to end in no more than a minute or just a smidge over a minute. Okay, so if that challenge sounds like something you're up to, then what would be great is if you were able to give that a go over the next few days. We give that a go over the next few days, and once you have it, then you just record that minute, and we either add it to the podcast, or I use that to promote the podcast when we do it on social media. So I think that would be a cool way to do it.
Yeah, yeah, I can do that. Definitely. I think there were so many different things that you said, specifically over the past half an hour that really resonated. And what I really want to do is like listen to it back, like take notes and craft the story, like you said, in my own words and put my own voice in it and really try to make it as concise as possible, which is, as I told you, is really something I struggle with from time to time when it comes to telling my story. So yeah, I think I can definitely work on that.
Cool. And then, I mean, you have as soon as I get the recording sort of all matched up, I'll probably send it to you before I bother with all the editing and stuff. But just so you have it and you can go through it as much as you want. But yeah, I think that would be cool if we can get like a cleaner version of you doing the 1 minute story. Then we'll figure out how exactly I do it. But we'll probably want to say, and like, do you want to give that a go? Here it is, and then it comes out perfectly, and then I go, actually that wasn't the first time she did that, right? We cut out 20 minutes of the podcast where we were going backwards and forwards when she was practicing, because let's
Yeah.
not be let's not exaggerate. Okay, cool. So I think that is the first step. The second thing, once we get that out of the way, one of the second thing you could try and do, if you think it could be useful to you, is get the broader story that we put together, so that like that timeline, and if you want to come up with like a 3, 4, 5 minute version, which is sort of like your full origin story. And it's not necessarily something you would tell from beginning to end. I think I've only told my origin story in full once or twice. But once you do that, you find that you can always get pieces of it, and they
Yeah.
become posts. They become other stories that are more relevant to other people you're speaking to. Occasionally you start working with people that are trying to become better speakers because they want to launch themselves in business. Then parts of your story resonate a lot more than some of the stuff that we were working on now. So I think that would be the second step, is the longer version of your story. Okay.
That makes a lot of sense, especially like, for example, if you want to launch a YouTube channel or something, and that could be like your key video, which really kind of tells people your whole story if they want to listen. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think when I've used the whole version of mine. And I think it depends. Like if I'm having a really like relaxed podcast, I will sometimes tell the 1 minute version of my story, And then they go, okay, but okay, fine. So you found out about it being like storytelling is this great thing, but like, did you start doing it straight away? And I go,
Mm,
oh no, no. I was stupid because I was like concerned about money. Then I did this, then I did that. And this is when I
yeah.
finally. So, like, in a conversation, the whole thing comes out over the course of
Mm,
10 minutes, 15 minutes. But so I don't tell it from beginning to end pretty much at any time. But the bits themselves are practiced enough that when I tell, I'm not improvising, which is, it's fine sometimes, but like some bits like when I say to people that I've only done this when I found out I was gonna have a second daughter, because having a first daughter and being a grown up hasn't taught me how that process works. That pretty much always gets a laugh, and that's something I like. When I was practicing originally, I was like, okay, I probably this would work, and I tested it worked and it stuck. So it's something I always
mm,
tell the exact same way. It's just easier than inventing it every time. And in my case, it's good to test for minefields and stupid stuff that I often say. It's like, okay,
mm.
maybe this will be misinterpreted. Maybe this should be out. So, um, okay,
Yeah.
so you've got your homework. I hope that this was more or less what you're expecting.
Oh, it was incredibly helpful. Yeah, it was very, very, very insightful and helpful and really made me think of what I'm doing in ways that I hadn't thought of before, because it really, really helps getting your perspective on it. Also, because you're in a similar field and you do understand the kind of client really well as well. So yeah, I just wasn't thinking of all the different issues and problems that they could have had that I just hadn't experienced by myself. And it's always good
Fair
to do
enough.
that. Yeah. So
Okay,
thank
so
you.
if you're welcome, and thank you for being the guinea pig of this experiment. And so, if people want to find out more about you or connect with you, is LinkedIn the best place, or do you want to send them anywhere else?
I have just launched my newsletter and my website will be developed further. So right now it's in a very basic stage, but it's up. So it's nsheen.com. So that's just my first letter of my name, N, and then Sheen, like Martin and
My,
Charlie
my
dot
my
com.
audience my audience is unable to spell, so we'll put that in the show notes. And anybody that wants to pop into the website or join the newsletter can do so. But
Mm,
I would be asking too much of them trying to spell any names that are not obvious enough. So let's not tax their brains more than we've already taxed it over this
mm,
long episode we've just done.
mm.
Okay. Well, once again, thank you very much for coming. This was absolutely fantastic. And all right, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves, and until next time.